What you're about to hear is going to frustrate some people, confuse others, and wake up the rest. Because it exposes a dating shift nobody wants to acknowledge. Everywhere, quietly, behind the scenes, something strange is happening. Average men in their late 30s and 40s, regular guys with normal jobs, normal lives, normal experiences, are suddenly getting attention from women who wouldn't even look at them 10 or 15 years ago. Women who once demanded perfection, height, income, lifestyle, status, are now initiating conversations, asking for dates, complimenting, showing interest. And these men are stunned. They're thinking maybe they finally became attractive, finally leveled up, finally entered their dating peak. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Nothing about them dramatically changed. They didn't suddenly grow 6 inches taller. They didn't magically erase wrinkles, stress, responsibilities, or hair loss. They didn't drastically increase their income, status, charisma, or desirability. Yet the attention arrives anyway, almost out of nowhere. So what really changed? The dating market did. And the shift is brutal, mathematical, biological, and inevitable. To understand it, imagine a woman at 25. She's in the prime dating demographic. Youth, optimism, smooth skin, energy, possibility, all at peak value. She could be working a modest job, living with roommates, still figuring out life, but on dating apps and in real-world interactions, she's surrounded by interest. Professional men, older men, successful men, ambitious men. They pursue, compliment, invest. She gets taken to expensive restaurants, flown to weekend trips, invited into lives far above her financial level. She becomes accustomed to attention from men who have already built something. And over time, she begins to mistake attention for options. She starts believing these men aren't just interested, they're attainable long-term. She assumes attraction equals commitment potential. She assumes access equals selection power. So when an average, stable guy her own age shows interest, she barely considers him. Too ordinary, too predictable, not enough status, not exciting enough. Why choose average when proof of better keeps appearing?
She doesn't realize those high-value men aren't dating her with intent. They're passing time. They enjoy her youth, her presence, her novelty, but they're not building futures with her. They're not proposing. They're not inviting her into long-term plans. She is temporary entertainment, but she interprets it as qualification. Fast forward to 32. That same woman now has a career, confidence, independence, maybe her own apartment, maybe a nicer car. On paper, she improved, but the dating market isn't reacting the same way. The messages slow down. The men who once chased are now dating women in their mid-20s, the age group she used to belong to. She feels confused, even insulted. The quality of her matches declines, but her standards don't, because in her mind, she still deserves the attention she once received. And this disconnect begins to hurt. Then comes 36, 38, sometimes 40. That's when reality hits like a freight train. Many of the successful men she used to date are married now, or divorced and determined, or completely uninterested in building a life with someone their own age. They want younger women with more reproductive runway, fewer emotional scars, fewer lifestyle demands. Meanwhile, younger men her age aren't pursuing older women for long-term commitment either. They're building their careers, exploring, waiting, positioning, not settling down. Suddenly, the dating pool that once felt infinite becomes a puddle. And now, The very men she ignored in her 20s, the average earners, the 5'9" guys, the men with modest homes, simple routines, quiet lifestyles, finally come into focus. Not because she suddenly finds them physically irresistible, but because for the first time she realizes they offer something rare: availability, stability, consistency, genuine intention. This is the plot twist nobody wants to admit. Average men didn't rise in value. Her options shrank around her. This is why she's more flexible now, why height requirements disappear, why income expectations lower, why personality suddenly matters more than lifestyle. Because the men she once believed she could choose from forever, the men she assumed would always be waiting, have moved on, partnered up, or traded up. And now she's competing in a marketplace where her previous leverage no longer exists. But here's where it gets even more interesting. These men, the average, overlooked, invisible men from 15 years ago, now have choices. Time improved them. They built careers, savings, confidence, maturity, discipline. They learned communication, emotional control, responsibility. They didn't peak at 25. They grew into their value. And now they get to decide. Not because they're suddenly extraordinary, but because the dating economy flipped and they're in demand for the first time in their lives. Which raises a question most women never expected to face. What happens when the men they once rejected no longer need them? And that's where the story really begins.
Here's where things get brutally real. And if you're a man over 35 or 40, you've probably felt this shift without having words for it. For most of your 20s, you were invisible to the kind of women who now suddenly see you. Back then, you were the guy she kept as an option, not a priority. You were the backup plan, the safe choice she swore she would never pick because she was meant for more. When you messaged her, she took days to reply, if she replied at all. When you hinted at something serious, she said things like, "Not ready, still figuring myself out, focusing on my career, seeing where things go." Translation: you weren't exciting enough for the version of herself she thought she was. While you were grinding, building a career, learning skills, sacrificing sleep, paying off debt, dealing with reality, she was playing in a fantasy marketplace, going on dates with men who had already done that grind, eating at restaurants you couldn't afford, traveling on someone else's budget, posting photos with captions about living her best life while you were stuck at home, exhausted, wondering why putting in effort never seemed to pay off. Now fast forward a decade. You're not perfect, but you're stable. You might own a small place or be close to it. You have savings or at least control over your finances. You're not chasing every night out. You've taken the hits, learned the lessons, and become more grounded. You're not the wild card. You're the safe harbor. And suddenly, she appears. She's 37, 39, maybe 42. Attractive, well put together, accomplished. She has stories from trips, careers, exes, almost engagements, situationships, heartbreaks. She's polished. She knows how to talk, how to impress, how to present herself like someone who has lived a full life. And in many ways, she has. But behind the composure, there's a pressure she can't hide. She's not just looking for a boyfriend. She's looking for an exit plan. You start noticing how fast everything moves. She's asking where this is going by the third week. She's talking about moving in by the third month. She's dropping hints about marriage, kids, timelines, the future, not out of excitement, but out of urgency. You can feel the countdown clock ticking in every conversation. She doesn't want to waste time. On paper, that sounds reasonable. Directness is better than games. But you have to understand what sits under that urgency. She's not trying to build something slow and organic with you. She's trying to salvage something for herself before the window slams shut completely. And whether she says it or not, there's an unspoken truth running in the background of her mind. You're not her fantasy pick. You're her reality pick. Deep down, she remembers the men she used to date. Taller, Richer, more charismatic, more ambitious, more socially dominant. Men who made her feel like she was living in a movie. Men who flew her places, introduced her to elite circles, made her feel hand-picked. Those men either settled down with younger women, never settled at all, or completely moved out of her reach. And now she looks at you. You're solid, dependable, not flashy. You don't bring luxury, but you bring reliability. You're not taking her to rooftop lounges 4 nights a week, but you're not blowing her rent money on bottle service either. You're not promising a penthouse, but you're not asking to crash on her couch. You are the man who could have built something incredible with her at 26 if she'd chosen you back then. But she didn't.
Back then, she called guys like you too boring, too normal, too predictable. Now, she calls you mature. The real story is brutally simple. Her market perception hasn't changed as fast as her actual market value. In her head, she still feels like she's that 25-year-old who could walk into a room and capture every man's attention. But the reality is different. Men aren't flocking like they used to. The matches are fewer. The response is slower. The men she wants don't want her back in the same way. So she recalibrates. Suddenly, height isn't everything. Suddenly, a normal salary is acceptable. Suddenly, a small apartment is charming. Suddenly, she can overlook things she once swore were deal breakers. And on the surface, it looks like growth, maturity, realism. But under the surface, it's something different. It's surrender. She's not choosing you from a position of abundance. She's choosing you from a position of loss. Loss of time, loss of fertility, loss of leverage, loss of fantasy. You can feel it in the way she talks about the past, the way she mentions almost relationships, the way she brings up all the things she thought she'd have by now: husband, kids, house, stability. There's an undertone of grief in everything. It's not just that she wants a future, it's that she's mourning the one she thought was guaranteed. And here's the part men underestimate: resentment. When a woman feels forced to settle, even if it's by her own choices, she rarely directs that resentment at herself. She directs it outward, at you, at men in general, at the world, at circumstances. You become the physical representation of all the roads she didn't take, all the men she didn't lock down, all the timelines that didn't work out. She might not say it, but it lives in her eyes when your life doesn't match the fantasy she used to project onto richer, more exciting men. She notices your car. She notices your neighborhood. She notices your furniture, your clothes, your routine. She doesn't just see what's there. She sees what's missing, compared to the life she imagined for herself. And even if she likes you as a person, that gap between reality and fantasy doesn't disappear. It sits there, quietly, like a pressure in her chest. Some days it's small, other days it's suffocating. And the longer she stays with you, the more likely it leaks out in criticism, comparison, emotional distance, constant low-level disappointment. This is why so many men end up in relationships they technically won. She finally chose them, but feel emotionally undervalued every single day. Because she chose them too late. Not too late in calendar years, too late in desire. By the time she decided to take men like you seriously, her interest wasn't driven by attraction. It was driven by fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of aging without a partner. Fear of missing the chance for a family. Fear of being invisible. You're not the embodiment of her dream. You're the last reasonably safe bridge away from the nightmare she's now staring at, a future where no one chooses her at all. And this is where, for the first time in your life, the story flips. Because unlike your 20s, you now have something you didn't have back then. You have options. You can accept that role, the man she settled on at the final hour. You can reject it and aim higher, even if you never thought you could. Or you can walk away from the game completely and keep your peace. But whatever you choose, you need to see clearly what's actually happening. Because the next step in this story is where most men make their biggest mistake. They confuse being finally noticed with being finally valued, and those two things are not the same.
This is where the story becomes uncomfortable for both sides, because for the first time in the modern dating era, average men hold the leverage, and most of them don't even realize it yet. They still think like the ignored 26-year-old version of themselves, instead of the man the market now revolves around. They're shocked by the attention, flattered by the effort, flustered by the sudden interest, and that's exactly why so many of them get emotionally ambushed. Because while he's thinking finally, she's thinking urgently. He thinks this connection is natural. She knows it's strategic. He assumes timing finally aligned. She knows timing is running out. He believes she chose him intentionally. She chose him because reality forced her hand. And this misunderstanding sets thousands of men up for the exact trap they once envied, being desired only when it no longer matters. So many men rush into relationships with women who ignored them during the years when validation meant something. They crave that long-denied approval so deeply that they forget to ask the only question that matters: why now? Why didn't she see your value when you were young, hopeful, and emotionally available? Why didn't she choose you before the urgency, before the pressure, before the shrinking options? Because here's the truth most men don't want to admit. Sometimes she didn't overlook you by accident. She overlooked you because she didn't think she'd ever need you. Now she does. And that shift doesn't create gratitude. It creates entitlement. In her mind, she still believes she deserves the men she dated at 27. She still imagines the lifestyle she once sampled. She still pictures the future she assumed life owed her. You become the bridge between that fantasy and the reality she's trying not to accept. Which means she doesn't love you for who you are. She loves you for what you prevent her from confronting. That's why relationships formed out of panic so often feel heavy. He feels responsible for fixing a story he didn't write. She feels cheated by a world that didn't give her what she expected. And that emotional imbalance destroys attraction faster than time ever could. Because no man, average or exceptional, wants to be chosen by someone who secretly mourns not choosing someone else. And here's where men finally get to decide what their story looks like. Not society, not dating apps, not rejection, not silence, not algorithms. Them. Because at 40, a man has something a 25-year-old woman never imagined he'd have. Options. He can date a woman his age, but only if she genuinely respects him, not reluctantly tolerates him. He can date younger if compatibility exists, not because he wants revenge, but because it's allowed now. He can stay single and build a life he actually enjoys, instead of one he feels obligated to maintain. He can walk away without fear, without panic, without scarcity, because his desirability is no longer imaginary, it's measurable. And ironically, that calm certainty makes him even more attractive. While women were gaining confidence in their 20s through external validation, men were quietly developing internal value: career, stability, purpose, resilience, discipline. Not flashy, not glamorous, but real. And real ages well. This is why a man at 40 doesn't need to chase anymore. He doesn't need to beg for attention, negotiate for affection, prove his worth, or audition for love. He already earned his life. He doesn't have to accept someone who only wants him because the music stopped and he's the last available chair. And for the first time ever, women know that too. That's why they're more careful now, softer, more polite, more accommodating, more available. Not because they're suddenly kinder, because suddenly they're aware of consequences. Rejection now has weight. Silence now has meaning. Indifference now has stakes. So the question becomes not why women over 40 want average men. We already know that answer. The real question is whether those men want them. Because the biggest plot twist in modern dating isn't women running out of time. It's men finally realizing they never needed validation from the women who withheld it. And once a man understands that, once he sees the market clearly, once he recognizes his position, once he stops operating from scarcity and starts operating from choice, everything changes. His standards rise. His energy shifts. His intuition sharpens. He stops tolerating resentment disguised as romance. He stops entertaining women who arrive only when convenience demands it. He starts choosing partners based on genuine connection, not delayed approval. And suddenly, for the first time in this entire story, something perfectly balanced appears. Mutual desire. Not desperation, not settling, not fear, not timeline pressure. Just two people choosing each other without fantasy, without panic, without entitlement. But here's the twist that makes men think, rethink, and question everything. If dating really is a marketplace, what happens when average men finally start acting like supply instead of demand? Because when they do, the entire system flips. So tell me, do you think men should accept the attention from women who ignored them for decades, or is it finally their turn to be selective? I want to see what people really think.